The night was supposed to belong to laughter. Outside the Sands Hotel in Las Vegas, neon lights pulsed like a second heartbeat for the city, washing the pavement in reds and golds and electric blues. Limousines slid in one after another, their doors opening like curtains, releasing men in tailored suits and women wrapped in satin and perfume. Inside, the Copa room hummed with expectation. Cigarette smoke curled lazily beneath the chandeliers. Glasses clinked. The low murmur of voices blended into a warm, living sound, the sound of people who had come to forget their worries for a while and trust them to a man who had never failed them. Dean. Martin stood alone in the narrow space behind the stage, one hand resting lightly on the back of a chair, the other holding a small white towel he hadn't used yet. From where he stood, he could hear the band warming up, soft brass, gentle piano, the subtle shuffle of brushes against a snare. He had stood backstage hundreds of times, maybe thousands, but tonight something felt different. Not wrong. Just unsettled. Like the air before a sudden change in weather, he closed his eyes for a moment, in the darkness behind his lids. Memories drifted through him, small clubs where nobody knew his name, smoky rooms where the applause came late and left early, the long climb from being the other guy to being the one people dressed up to see. He didn't think of fame the way others did. To him, it wasn't a throne. It was a responsibility. When people sat in those seats, they weren't just buying tickets. They were placing a piece of their evening, their mood, sometimes their hearts, into his hands. A stagehand peeked around the curtain. 2 minutes, Dean. Dean nodded once, calm, polite the way he always was. When he stepped onto the stage, the room rose to meet him. Applause rolled forward like a warm wave, carrying whistles and cheers, the familiar affection of an audience that believed they knew him. Dean smiled, tipping his head slightly, acknowledging them not as a king but as a host, welcoming guests into his living room. The spotlight found him and held him there, bright but gentle, as if even the light understood his nature. The band eased into the opening notes, and Dean moved toward the microphone, relaxed, unhurried. He let the room settle. He always did. Silence, when used kindly, could be an invitation rather than an absence. "Good evening," he said softly. The words didn't need volume. They never had. Laughter came easily at first. His early jokes were light, almost lazy, the kind that drifted through the room and made people smile without thinking. Stories about the road, about old friends, about the small absurdities of life. The audience leaned in, comfortable, ready to be carried. But halfway through his opening set, something shifted. It began subtly, a sharp laugh that cut across another, a voice that didn't quite belong to the rhythm of the room. Dean caught it the way musicians catch a wrong note. He didn't stop. He kept going, trusting the warmth to smooth the edges. Then it happened again. Louder this time. A small cluster of men near the back had started their own show. At first, it was only murmured comments, laughter that arrived too early, too hard. The kind that wasn't responding to humor, but trying to replace it. A few nearby guests turned in their seats, uneasy. A waitress hesitated beside a table, unsure whether to move closer or step away. Dean noticed everything. He always had. He saw the way shoulders stiffened, the way conversation at surrounding tables dulled, the way attention fractured. The room was still his, but a hairline crack had appeared in the glass. He shifted the direction of his story, gently steering it toward something warmer, something human, a memory of his mother singing in the kitchen. A moment from the road when kindness had come from an unexpected place. The kind of stories that softened people, that reminded them of themselves. For a moment, it worked. The room leaned back in. Then one of the men stood, not fully, just enough to make himself visible. A comment followed, not clear enough to quote, but clear enough in tone. It wasn't playful. It wasn't friendly. It was the sound of someone who wanted to take something rather than share it. A ripple moved through the audience. Dean stopped speaking, not abruptly, not dramatically. He simply didn't continue. The band, trained by years of working with him, let the music fade until the last note hung in the air. and disappeared. The spotlight stayed where it was, but suddenly it felt brighter. Exposing rather than celebrating, Dean stood at the microphone, one hand resting lightly against the stand, and he said nothing at first. Some people laughed, assuming it was part of the act, a setup, a delayed punchline. But Dean didn't smile. He didn't frown either. He just looked out at them, not with anger, not with disappointment. With attention, the ugly noise from the back tried to fill the space. Another comment. Another burst of rough laughter. But without Dean's rhythm to lean on, it sounded smaller, thinner, like a voice shouting into a canyon in hearing. How little it truly was. Seconds passed in a room built on entertainment. Silence is powerful. It removes the stage from the performer and places it on everyone else. People shifted in their seats. Some glanced back. Others looked down at their glasses. The waitstaff froze, trays balanced, unsure whether to move. The band members sat motionless, hands resting on their instruments. Watching their friend, Dean slowly removed his hand from the microphone. He took one step forward, then another, not toward the men, toward the audience. His eyes moved across faces. Old couples, young soldiers on leave, a woman clutching her purse with both hands, a man who had probably saved for weeks to be there. He saw them all, and they felt it. Finally, when the room had fully quieted, when even the restless had run out of places to hide their noise, Dean spoke softly. "I've spent my whole life," he said, "singing to rooms like this, big ones, small ones, fancy ones, and some that barely had four walls." Single cough echoed, then vanished. "And I learned something early," he continued. "A stage isn't wood and lights. It's an agreement. I bring you what I've got. You bring me who you are. We meet somewhere in the middle." He paused. "I can sing over a lot of things," he said. "I can joke over a lot of things. But I don't know how to sing over people who don't want to be here with each other." The words didn't accuse. They invited. The men in the back did not respond. But the room did. Someone began to clap. Not the roaring applause from earlier. Something slower, respectful. One pair of hands, then another, then dozens. Until the sound built not into noise but into unity. Dean nodded. Once, not in victory, in gratitude, and only then did he turn, back to the microphone. But the night had already changed, and so had the story that was about to unfold. Because what Dean Martin was about to do next wouldn't make headlines. It wouldn't be shouted. It wouldn't even be sung. It would be felt. And for some in that room, it would follow them home. The applause did not end the unease. It only disguised it. When Dean Martin stepped away from the microphone and the band carefully eased back into music, the room followed him out of silence the way a lake follows a throne, stone ripples spreading, slow and uncertain. People clapped longer than usual, not because they were thrilled, but because they were relieved. Relieved that something had been said without being said, relieved that someone had held the line without drawing one. Dean smiled, sang, joked, and carried the night forward. To anyone who hadn't been listening with more than their ears, it might have looked like the show had simply found a new rhythm. But under the tables, beneath the smoke, inside the glances people kept exchanging, the atmosphere had changed. The crowd was quieter now, more attentive, not to be entertained, but to witness. By the time the curtain finally fell and the lights softened, Dean's shirt clung lightly to his back, not from exertion, but from the invisible effort of holding a room together. Backstage was narrower than people imagined. The glamour stopped at the velvet. Beyond it were plain walls, exposed pipes, and the faint smell of dust and metal. A few band members loosened their ties, speaking in low voices. Someone laughed too loudly, then stopped. Everyone could feel that the night had not finished. Speaking yet, Dean took the towel he had been holding before the show and finally pressed it to his face. He hadn't needed it during the performance. He needed it now. A knock came at the open door. Not a gentle one. A business knock. 2 sharp taps. Dean lowered the towel. "Come on in." The man who entered did not belong to the music. He wore a tailored suit the way some men wore uniforms. His posture straight, his expression permanently set between confidence and calculation. Victor Hale, one of the Sands senior entertainment executives. A man who didn't manage applause, he managed outcomes. "Hell of a moment out there," Victor said, glancing back toward the stage as if it were a ledger. "Not exactly what we rehearsed." Dean met his eyes. Calm, present. Crowds don't rehearse. Victor smiled thinly. "No, but performers do." He stepped inside, closing the door just enough to draw a line between what was public and what was not. The band's voices dulled into a distant murmur. "Those guys in the back," Victor continued. "They weren't just anybody." Dean waited. "Investors," Victor said. "Guests of guests. People who like to feel comfortable. They didn't come for lessons. They came for escape." Dean folded the towel once, slowly. "Escape doesn't have to be ugly." Victor's smile didn't change, but something behind it tightened. "It can't be corrective either." The word hung between them. Corrective. As if kindness were a disruption. As if dignity were a risk. "You made them feel seen," Victor said. "But not the way they like." Dean's voice was gentle. "I wasn't talking to them." Victor lifted an eyebrow. "That's exactly the problem." Silence returned, but it was not the same silence as on stage. This one was narrower, sharper, built for corners. "There's pressure, Dean," Victor went on. "Real money pressure. The kind that doesn't care how warm the applause sounds, only how long it lasts. Tonight could have gone bad. Real bad." Dean finally spoke. "It didn't," "No," Victor said. "Because people like you are good at catching falling rooms before they shatter. But you can't do that every night. And the higher up the room is, the harder it falls." Dean studied him for a moment. He saw what Victor didn't say. He saw the fear behind the control. The fragile architecture behind the confidence. "What are you asking me?" Dean said. Victor hesitated. "Just a fraction. I'm asking you to remember what they paid for." Dean nodded once. "I know what they paid for, and give them that," Victor said. "Only that." The door opened again before Dean could answer. A young stage assistant slipped in, nervous, holding a small envelope. "Mr. Martin, they asked me to give you this." Dean took it. It was unmarked. The assistant left quickly. Dean opened the envelope. Inside was a single folded card. No name, no greeting, just a sentence. "Some of us came to forget." "You reminded us." Dean did not react outwardly. But something moved through him, Victor noticed. "Fan mail?" "Something like that," Dean said. Victor exhaled. "Look, I'm not here to be the bad guy. I'm here to keep doors open. And doors stay open when people feel like they're getting what they expect." Dean slipped the card back into the envelope. "Sometimes what people expect isn't what they need." Victor straightened. "That's a luxury thought." Dean met his eyes again. "No, it's a responsibility one." Victor studied him, then shook his head slightly, as if looking at a beautiful but impractical design. "Just be careful, Dean. The crowd can turn. And when it does, it doesn't always turn pretty." With that, he left. The door closed. Dean remained where he was. The envelope in his hand. A memory rose uninvited. A bar in Ohio. Years ago. Before the suits. Before the marquees. A drunk man shouting. A waitress near tears. A room teetering on something ugly. Dean younger then. Quicker to deflect. Faster with a joke. He had made them laugh that night. Made them forget. But he had never forgotten the look on the waitress's face when laughter replaced help. He sat down slowly. The card felt heavier than it should have. A knock came again, this time, softer. Dean looked up. "Come in," a woman entered. Middle-aged, neatly dressed. Not from the casino. Not from management. She held her purse with both hands, as if it were a shield. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "They told me I couldn't come back, but I needed to say thank you." Dean rose. Of course, please. She hesitated, then stepped in. The door remained open behind her. My husband, she said. He's not well. We don't go out much anymore. Tonight was supposed to be easy. Just music. Something light. Her voice wavered. When those men started, when the room changed, I thought we'd made a mistake coming. Dean listened. But then you stopped, she said. You didn't fight them. You didn't joke them away. You just held the space. And for a moment, it felt like the room remembered itself. Her eyes glistened. We don't get many rooms like that anymore. Dean nodded, the corners of his expression soft. I'm glad you stayed. She smiled. So am I. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small photograph. An old one. Faded. A young couple dancing in a modest living room. That was us, she said. Your record was playing. Dean took the photo carefully, as if it were fragile. You've had good taste for a long time, she laughed quietly. Then she thanked him again and left. Dean stood, alone once more, 2 messages in one night. 1. Warning him to stay within the lines. 1. Thanking him for stepping outside them. He placed the photo on the table next to the envelope. He did not yet know that both would matter more than the applause ever. Could be because outside that door, beyond the glow of the stage, something had already begun moving, and not everyone who had heard his silence had heard it the same way. Some had felt comfort, others had felt challenged, and a few had felt exposed. The days between shows are usually soft. For most performers, they pass in hotel corridors, quiet meals, rehearsal notes, and late morning coffee that tastes faintly of the night before. For Dean Martin, they had always been a gentle descent from the stage, a place where applause faded into routine, and routine into rest. But after that night, the days were not soft, they were watchful. It began with small things. Conversations that stopped when he entered. Smiles that came half a second late. A stagehand who avoided his eyes. A familiar waiter who whispered instead of joked. Nothing overt, nothing dramatic. But pressure rarely announces itself. It arranges the room. Dean felt it most in the empty places, the spaces where warmth had lived and now hesitated. At rehearsal, the band played well but carefully. The pianist glanced at the door between songs. The drummer spoke in shorter sentences. It was as if everyone sensed that something had been unsettled, and no one yet knew whether it would settle again or finally tip. Dean did not ask questions. He listened. He listened to the way management's footsteps paused outside rehearsal rooms, to the way phones rang and were answered in other offices, to the way his name entered conversations more than it left them. One afternoon, as he stood alone on the darkened stage, a single work light burning overhead, Victor Hale approached again. This time, he did not smile. Word travels fast in places like this, Victor said, stopping a few feet away. Faster when it's interesting. Dean rested one hand lightly on the back of a chair. Is it interesting? Victor exhaled through his nose. It's unsettling. You made people talk about the room instead of the show. Sometimes the room is the show, Dean said. Victor's jaw tightened. Some of the people who talk don't buy tickets. They buy influence. Dean nodded. And some of the people who buy tickets bring their lives with them. Victor studied him. There are expectations now, he said. Not from the crowd. From above it? Dean did not need clarification. They want reassurance, Victor continued. They want to know the Sands is a place where things stay smooth, where nobody gets uncomfortable. Dean's voice was quiet. Comfort isn't the same as safety. Victor looked at him sharply. Don't turn this into something it isn't. Dean met his gaze. I'm not. It already is. Victor stepped closer. Another moment like that, he said, and it won't be a conversation anymore. It'll be a decision. He turned and walked away. Dean remained. He had heard that tone before. Early in his career, when rooms were smaller, when power sat closer to the exits, he knew what it meant when people stopped negotiating with your performance and started negotiating with your presence. That evening, he left the hotel alone and walked the strip without his jacket. Neon reflected in the pavement like broken color. Tourists passed him without recognizing him. A group of young men laughed loudly outside a club. A woman stood by a doorway, smoking, her face unreadable. Life, unfiltered. He stepped into a small diner that hadn't changed in 20 years. Vinyl booths, coffee that tasted like coffee. A counter polished thin by elbows and time, he sat. The waitress, older, tired, kind, poured him coffee without asking. "You're Dean Martin?" she said. He smiled. "Sometimes." She studied him for a moment. "My husband used to sing," she said. Before his voice gave out, "Sorry," Dean replied. She shook her head. "Don't be." He sang long enough to know who he was. She moved on. Dean stared into his cup. Know who he was. The phrase stayed. The next morning, a letter waited on his dressing table. Hotel stationery, typed, no signature. The Sands is not a place for social experiments. People come to be entertained, not confronted. Please remember your role. Dean folded the paper once. Then again, he did not tear it. He placed it in his jacket pocket. Beside the anonymous note he had kept. 2 messages. One, asking him to be. Smaller one, thanking him for being seen. That night show was full. Fuller than usual. People came early. They dressed carefully. They sat with intention. There was a sense in the room not of excitement, but of anticipation, as if something unscheduled might happen. Again, Dean felt it the moment he stepped out. The applause came, but it did not wash over him. It paused, as if the crowd were waiting to see which man he would be. Tonight, he began as he always had. Gentle humor, relaxed posture, familiar warmth. The band followed him. The crowd loosened. Then, from a side table, a voice cut in. Not. Loud pointed a comment aimed less at humor and more at disruption. A few people stiffened. Another voice followed. A ripple began. Not a wave yet, Dean. Slowed his speech. He finished the sentence he was on. Then he stopped the band, sensing it. Faded, the silence returned. But this time, it was not curious. It was charged. The men were not hidden now. They were visible, relaxed, watching him, waiting to see if he would deflect again, joke again, smooth it over again. Dean stood, and in that stillness, something remarkable happened. The crowd did not look at him. They looked at each other, faces turned, postures adjusted. A woman near the front shook her head slightly. A man near the aisle crossed his arms. Not defensively, but protectively. The room was beginning to recognize itself. Dean did not speak. He did not gesture. He did not leave. He stayed, and the longer he stayed, the smaller the disruption became, until finally, one of the men cleared his throat. Another shifted, and the noise dissolved, not because it was defeated, but because it was no longer. Fed the applause that followed was hesitant at first, then real, then strong. Dean nodded once, and resumed after the show. No one came backstage for a long time. Then a young man appeared. One of the ushers, "I just wanted to say," he said, "I've worked here 3 years. I've never seen the room protect itself." Dean looked at him. Neither had I. The young man smiled, relieved, and left Dean sat alone. He knew now, whatever happened next would not stay quiet, because when a room learns, it can choose what it allows. It does not forget, and when powerful people realize they no longer fully control a room, they do not stay silent. The night Dean Martin was scheduled to return to the Sands, Las Vegas felt different. The city still glowed. The signs still sang in color. The traffic still moved like a lazy river of chrome and light. But inside the Copa room, something had changed. People were not only arriving dressed for entertainment, they were arriving curious. Word had traveled not through headlines, but through conversations, through waiters, through musicians, through couples who had been there the night when laughter cracked, and a man chose not to fill the break. Some said Dean had embarrassed powerful guests. Some said he had rescued a collapsing room. Some said he had simply stood there and somehow made everyone feel seen. The seats filled faster than usual, not louder. More deliberately, backstage, Dean adjusted his cuffs in front of a narrow mirror. He looked the same as he always did, relaxed posture, calm eyes, suit pressed with care. But inside, he carried weight. Not fear, responsibility. Because this time, he knew something others didn't. This time the room was not neutral. Victor Hale had made that clear earlier in the day. The call had been brief, polite, carefully worded. Dean had been reminded of contracts, expectations, and atmosphere. He had been told without being told that tonight was about restoration, about smoothing edges, about reminding the room that nothing uncomfortable. It was supposed to happen here. Dean had listened. He always listened, but listening was not the same as agreeing. He had also received something else that afternoon. A folded note slipped beneath his hotel door. No name, just handwriting. Some of us were in the back. Not all of us were laughing. Thank you for not pretending. Dean had placed that note in his pocket before leaving now. As the band tuned and the curtain waited, he stood quietly, breathing in the familiar backstage air. Not as a man about to perform, but as a man about to choose, the stage manager signaled. Dean stepped forward. The applause was immediate. Stronger than before, but also watchful. People were not clapping only because they were happy. They were clapping because they wanted to know what kind of night this would be. Dean acknowledged them with a small nod. The band began softly. He did not go straight to the microphone. Instead, walked slowly across the stage, as if feeling the space beneath his feet, letting the sound settle, letting the room become present with itself. Then he turned, and instead of opening with a joke, he spoke. "I've been thinking about something," he said gently. "About why we come to places like this?" The room leaned forward. "We say it's for music, or laughter, or to forget the week we had." A small smile touched his mouth. "And all that's true, but I think there's something else too. I think sometimes we come to remember who we are when nobody's asking anything from us." No glasses clinked. No voices moved. "Because when nobody's asking," Dean continued, "we get to choose what kind of people we want to be to each other." He let the words breathe. "In most rooms, the loudest voice wins," he said. "But that doesn't make it the truest one, and it doesn't make it the one that lasts." A ripple of unease passed through certain tables. Dean felt it. He did not avoid it. He stepped closer to the microphone. "There was a moment the other night," he said, "when this room went quiet. And in that quiet, something interesting happened. We heard ourselves." The silence was now total. "No spotlight can do that," he said. "No band. No singer. Only people can do that, together." Then he did something unexpected. He took a small folded paper from his pocket. He opened it. "This was slipped under my door today," Dean said. "It doesn't have a name, so I won't give one," he read softly. "Some of us were in the back. Not all of us were laughing. Thank you for not pretending." Dean folded the note and placed it on the piano beside him. "I don't know who wrote that," he said, "but I know what they gave me. They gave me the truth." He looked out across the room, and the truth is, not every laugh is kind. Not every joke is harmless, and not every silence is empty. He paused. "Some silences," he said, "are full of things we haven't had the courage to say yet." A man stood near the side of the room, not one of the loud ones. A man older, wearing a simple jacket. His voice was unsteady, but audible. "My brother stopped coming out," he said. "Because rooms stopped feeling safe." The manager stiffened. Dean did not. He turned slightly toward the man. "I'm glad you came tonight." The man swallowed. "So am I." Someone else spoke. Then another. Not speeches. Just fragments. A woman who said she was tired of pretending cruelty was funny. A young man who said he worked here and had seen too many nights go wrong. A couple who said they almost left last week and stayed. Victor Hale appeared near the back, tense. Signaling to the stage manager, Dean raised a hand, not to stop the room, to protect it. "Thank you," he said to the voices. "That's enough." The crowd settled. Dean returned to center stage. "This isn't a courtroom," he said gently. "And it isn't a lecture hall. It's a place for music. So let's give it that." The band began a slow introduction, but Dean did not sing immediately. He waited, and in that waiting, something extraordinary happened. The room quieted itself. No instruction, no command, just understanding when Dean finally sang. His voice was not louder than usual. It was warmer. The song was not one of his most famous. It was slower, about choosing gentleness when the world offered easier options, about walking away from easy laughter to keep something better. Intact, people cried without hiding it. Men who had not planned to feel anything stared into their glasses and did not lift them. Waitresses stopped, pretending not to listen. Victor Hale stood frozen, watching something he did not know how to manage, and when the final note faded, the applause did not crash. It rose, slow, strong, unified. Not celebration, recognition. Dean bowed his head. Slightly, he did not smile widely. He did not gesture grandly. He simply stood there, receiving something deeper than approval. After the show, backstage, Victor approached him. "You changed the room," he said quietly. Dean met his eyes. "The room changed itself. I just didn't interrupt." Victor studied him for a long moment, then exhaled. "We'll get complaints," he said. Dean nodded. "You always do." "In praise," Victor added reluctantly. Dean smiled then, softly. "You always do." Victor looked away. Later, long after the crowd had gone, Dean returned to the empty stage alone. The chairs were upturned, the lights dim, the smoke gone. He walked to the center, and for a moment stood in silence. Not the silence of tension, the silence of peace. Because some nights are remembered for what was said, and some for what finally didn't need to be.